Hi, I'm Ron Mitchell from the Bay State Banner, and I'm here on GBH's set at the Newsfeed Cafe in Boston Public Library's main branch. I'm partnering with GBH and their wonderful production team to help amplify the message and conversations of our black and brown community. So I want to thank GBH, and please, stay tuned. There's lots more to come. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of GBH Amplifies. I'm Ron Mitchell, co-owner, editor, and publisher of New England's Bay State Banner, and I'm glad to be here with three incredible panelists who celebrate both art and history through their incredible work. This month is Black History Month, and each of our guests understand that art is fundamental to human expression, woven into the fabric of civilization since the beginning of time. As playwright Eugene O'Neill once said, "There is no present or future, only the past happening over and over again." And as philosopher George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Today, our conversation will transport us back in time, from abolitionists also to the civil rights movement and through the ages. While we address art as it continues to reflect society's cultural beliefs, values, and norms, while we catalyze and discuss the growth. All three of our guests have achieved remarkable successes as they pave the way to present their art and culture to the world, and we thank them for being here today. For our first guest is Dr. Barry Gaither, and he's the Executive Director of the Museum of the National Center of African American History. Thank you, Barry. Oh, African American Artists, excuse me. I'll
Give
say
me
that
a
again.
different
Museum of the
portfolio.
National
Maybe
Center
I'll
of
get a
African American
salary.
Artists. I'm sorry, Barry, the mouthful. Also, our next guest is also Lamerchi Frazier, Executive Director of Spoke Art, Inc., and she's also a very prominent visual artist with multiple pieces of art in many international museums around the world. Very acclaimed. Thank you so much. And then our final guest, last but of course not least, is Amari Parrish Jeffries, Dr. Amari Parrish Jeffries. And he is the president and CEO of the Embrace King Boston, which is the organization that has helped to develop and who is the shepherd of the wonderful Embrace statue on Boston City Common, or actually Boston Gardens.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. So I want to start off, we have a new administration in Washington, and there is a big potential change in funding for social art and art overall. So I want to start, I'll start with you, Lamerchi. Talk with us a little bit about how you present your art in the world and in Boston, and how you feel this may or may not affect how you present your work.
I often start with how did we get here? Why abolition was important? What is fundamental about the principles of democracy that have been mythological in some spaces for us. And so as we began in Boston, particularly in the harbor of 1638, and then by 1641 we have the Body of Liberties, that is a law making Massachusetts the first to adopt slavery legally. It puts into place a question asked by Amir Baraka: how did I get in the dark? This idea of being able to negotiate space, land, water, property as the dominion of a narrative that we were not included in. Jamaica Kincaid also asked the question, even as far back as 1492, I wasn't considered yet. And so from that vantage point of looking at what is the story that we're telling, who are the hidden people in the history, where are they located, what spaces do they occupy, is a part of the work that I do. And I start out with I remember, I reclaim, I restore, and I reimagine. And so those spaces that are pertinent for understanding the life experiences of Black and brown people, indigenous people, is a long history. It has a trajectory of at least 500 years. So in visualizing that, we're looking at an aesthetic that has not been celebrated until more recently in the American landscape of sculpture and of other types of works. And so I am very privileged to be able to bring some of the stories that we do not know forward.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
so that is a part of where I begin. And as we move into abolition, we know that some of the first abolitionists happened, at least documented, by 1770 with Prince Hall, Phyllis Wheatley, Crispus Attucks. We can go on. So those stories are important to portray in the visual sense, because some people may not look at a book. They may not see the black and white on a page, but they can see and have dialogue with visual art. So that is where I think the critical nature of what the black aesthetic and other storytelling modalities are concerned with expanding the narrative.
African American history has certainly been driven in the American culture through art, presented through art over many, many centuries. And one of the most prominent, obviously, African American figures is Martin Luther King. And the new Embrace statue on the Boston Public Commons, is a wonderful tribute to him. Can you share with us what the process of creating the statue, and how you guys were able to make such a prominent statue and such a prominent statement? Because Embrace isn't just about the statue, but it's about actively creating history and presenting the history of Dr. King and Coretta Scott King to the country. So you guys have a very interactive approach. So share with us the story and the approach of.
Yeah, and I want to start off by acknowledging Barry Gaither and Lemerchie Frazier. They were intimately responsible for the Embrace Monument being here as artists and curators, and on the original selection committee for this memorial, to build a memorial for Martin and Coretta. We're in a repeating moment. When I was reflecting on 2020 and how many of us felt being locked away, not being able to love on our loved ones, being with each other in community, being scared that breathing on someone could kill you, like we were wiping down groceries and all those things. It feels a little bit like we're back there again. We're a little bit in Groundhog Day, but instead of being afraid to wipe down our groceries, we're almost afraid to buy the groceries because of the inaccessibility of basic needs for us. And so it's a different challenge ahead of us around our basic needs and what it means to survive as Black people. And so the Embrace is a promissory ring that many of us, our founders here on stage with us today, made to each other in the city of Boston, that if we made it out of here, we would commit to justice, we would commit to inclusion, we would commit to the values of Martin and Coretta, who met here as college students back in the 50s. And so it's the polishing of that ring, polishing of the Embrace. It's a new commitment to all of us that we are still committed to justice despite the chaos of new executive orders every other week, which is intentional, right?
Yep.
And art is used to help sense make for folks, help meaning make for folks, help translate our experiences into tangible objects so that we don't feel like we're alone. And the Embrace is important now more than ever. It is a tangible object that has united us, and we got mass community support when we built Embrace, and so we're on that second phase of that mass community support.
And your community support is continuing to grow. You have a wonderful event every year, the Sneaker Ball and all of that. So I was happy enough to be there and experience, and the fact that you honor other folks in the community who have committed to, increasing King's legacy and Coretta's legacy across our city, state, and country. So I think that's a wonderful transition. As I said, it's not just a monument that sits in a park, but it's an interactive process that you guys have endeavored to continue to push his story and progress, their story and their progress and what it means to our community. I want to move over to you, Dr. Edmund Variegatha. I know that you, as I recall, are one of the sages. I've been working with you for decades and decades in your museum, and I'm so honored to have you here. And I want to give you a chance to talk to us about how you see this current time as we move forward in Black History Month and in the environment that we're in, and how you continue to share the art in the museum and the message of the museum with our city and state.
It's important to remember that to be human is to be social. It locates you in a narrative. that existed before you arrived and will be there when you're gone. That narrative is a collective property. We all participate in the making of it. And within that making, we create things that have emphasis because they, for one reason or another, help us to order our experience in ways that matter. The same is true of personalities. There are some figures who, because of their largeness, take on a property that makes us all participate in who they are and what they've done. For example, that's certainly true of a figure like Dr. King. If you had the opportunity to sit and hear his voice and to see him at work, you had an opportunity to see the majesty of Black oratorial tradition, the wealth of power in the repetition of lines of songs generated by our forebears under all kinds of circumstances. You had a feeling of being moved by the spirit that had inhabited all of those things at the time of their origin. And all of that translates to a sense of obligation that you shouldn't be the one to drop the ball. So those of us who are very involved in fostering the ongoing presentation and engagement of the arts with history are in the business of trying to make settings in which critical thinking is married to criticism, in which content is inseparable from the skills of articulation. And in that sense, a work like Embrace challenges us because it isn't the easy familiarity. It's seeing something from a new perspective and responding to it. It's being provoked because there is always contestation over history. That's the nature of it as a property. What we're looking at and hearing when we pay attention to Washington in the present administration is an effort to neuter history, to separate it from the energy of the people who make it, and to reduce it to one person's narrative. Essentially, there's an effort to say my story is the story. No other telling is valid. We cannot allow that to stand. We can't be reduced to nothing before posterity. We can't give ourselves over to an accommodation that in the short term might seem profitable, but in the long term is the decimation of who we are and have been. Each time we look at ourselves, we should be thinking, we are at once the past, the present, and the future. We are, by bloodline, the descendants of ancient peoples going back to the earliest times of the Nile. At the same time, we are in each moment making decisions about what to do next and thinking about the issues that are coming at us in the wind and the water and that arise from the ground on which we stand. And in all of that is the creative opportunity to reframe the importance of those experiences in what we teach. Because all of us who are involved in art are necessarily involved in teaching. So there's a commission that comes with all of this, and the commission is to resist being reduced to anything small. All learning is to make you bigger, and that's true for us.
And thank you so much. That is such a wonderful, wonderful statement. And keeping with that theme, Lamerci, can you talk to us about some of your newest exhibit and why you kind of chose or how you choose your exhibits and the process that you go through to kind of continue to tell your artistic, creative story?
Well, presently, I have two works in a local exhibit at the Museum of the National Center of African American Artists, where Barry Gaither is the executive director.
I heard a little about that. I heard a little bit about that.
You heard a little bit about
A little bit about that, yes.
It is an exhibit of 8 artists who are concerned and organized by Paul Goodnight, artist Paul Goodnight, to look at violence, why it's in our communities, how can we reach a solution to some of it to stem the violence. And it is called, the exhibit itself is called Cancel Violence. Aptly named because that's exactly what we would like to do.
It's to cancel the violence in our community.
Cancel violence. So the two works that I have in that show, one is called The Holler, and the other is called Just Us. And these both speak to what is a question. The question for The Holler is why this has happened. The question then is answered in Just Us. What the images that go across the canvas in The Holler are coming from what Mr. Gaither alluded to, and that was our roots in Nubia and Kemet, and that holler across what becomes that middle passage or our journey to the other side of the water, to mothers who may be losing their sons. As a mother of 2 sons, that was a very crucial piece of my own expression and story of mothers in my community for safety.
So you brought in the ancient history of our people and the power that our culture has and brought it forward into this day and age, and asking those questions about that dichotomy and why we're having the struggles we're having now.
Right.
And also reminding everybody the history that we come from and sharing the history of our people.
And why this is happening to us. We have a distance from ourselves. We're dislocated from a continent that may have been where our origins and where civilization has begun. And so we're not really in the identification of us being connected to that civility and to that understanding of humanity and being. So we're pressed up against hegemony that is not in our favor. So in order to counteract that, we have to have a counter hegemony that sees a Black as beautiful, that sees our youth coming into love. Mel King said very aptly, love is the question and the answer. And so in the second canvas of mine, that is what I am trying to portray, the embrace of a mother's love of her child, this hysterical baptism of the water and the cleansing that happens with us. But the violence that we turn in on ourselves must cease. We must identify with the best of ourselves.
And we call it African American History Month, but it seems that we might want to rephrase it to Africa Diaspora Month.
It is African
and share
diaspora.
the whole diaspora. And with that note, I want to come back to you, Mari, and talk more about how you guys have been able to not just talk about King's legacy and Coretta's legacy, but talk about the whole African American commitment to moving this country forward.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something that Dr. Gaither said. Just thinking about how you framed our MLK event. It is intentionally designed to be loud and bold and to illuminate this different facet of Dr. King, to not sanitize Dr. King's legacy with a few quotes on his holiday, but to illuminate Black love.
It was a celebration of Black love, a celebration of Black culture, a
Martin
celebration
and Coretta, right? Black love, and there is nothing more radical than Black love. And I think it leads to where we are now in Black History Month, which, as we know, started really, Carter G. Woodson really started it as a celebration of Frederick Douglass's birthday, connecting it with Douglass and Lincoln became Negro History Week. But thinking about Frederick Douglass as a subject and an artist, and him as a figure, one of the most photographed
Yeah, the most
individual
photographed individual of his time.
Yes.
19th century.
of his time, and I think to piggyback on what Lamerci said, to illustrate a black aesthetic, a level of seriousness. There's very few photographs of Frederick Douglass not in a regal,
immaculate attire,
serious,
and
you know,
yes,
you
yes.
see a few of them where he's smiling and laughing, and you're kind of
But a
stunned
lot.
by those because they're candids. They were indeed candids because he had an intention of himself as a subject. And so when we think about all the ways in which culture, holidays, create rituals that we embody as a part of who we are as people, it's important for us to illuminate the MLK holiday. It's important for us to illuminate Black History Month. It's important for us to illuminate Juneteenth. It's important for us to illuminate Women's History Month, Indigenous Peoples Month, all the ways in which we are not sanitized and we are not made invisible, which is contrary to what's happening now. And I think that's why it's important for us as an organization to take King as an example and to illuminate it across all the diversities of our culture, you know, all the ways it means for us to be residents in the United States.
Got it. Thank you.
It matters that we study all of these events that are pieces of our history.
I wanna
because
jump in
there
as
is
well.
a grander architecture behind the whole of that, which is we are, for better or worse, impacted forever by the colonial experience that for hundreds of years impacted our forebears. That experience was made possible by violence, by cannons and cannonballs and might. And our life under that experience was distorted in profound ways that separated us from our own humanity.
And history.
When that era came to an end, it's reincarnated as Jim Crow, as collapsed Reconstruction, as vagrancy laws. Up until practically yesterday, it's an unbroken oppression that leads to intercommunal violence because there were few other options to assert yourself.
I
and
want to jump in.
become
I want to jump
yourself.
in and address this particular issue. I know from my long-standing relationship with your museum, with the museum that you are the curator of, one of the most prominent exhibits, your permanent exhibit, is one of an Egyptian tomb.
Nubian.
Excuse me, of a Nubian tomb. Excuse me,
Yes.
of a Nubian tomb. So share with us the importance that you felt why it was so important for you in your museum to honor the Nubian culture and
I'll
to
give you
take
two
us back
quick
to that.
and easy ways to think about that. One is we often say to youngsters who come to us, you come from greatness. And the logical question is, show me the evidence. So we wanted to create an exhibition of genuinely ancient objects that could be seen and witnessed in person at the time, responding to that very real inquiry. So Aspelta, a Nubian king's burial chamber, has a large community of 2,600-year-old original objects from King Aspelta's tomb and times. So it's a confrontation across time. The second thing I sometimes say to youngsters, I say, let me introduce you to your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, because I want to put them in a lineage of responsibility that says, if this guy was able to get these pyramids done 2,600 years ago without a Mac or
Without
a
a
PC,
computer or a crane or
and you are the descendant, you ought to be able to do something far greater because of the instruments of your moment in time. So all of our history can be engaged in confronting each generation with how it needs to move forward and build on what was bequeathed to it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that insight. And I know that all of us have a very strong opinion about the current trend to remove DEI and remove African American history from textbooks and from the general public, as you said, because if they can, if the lineage and if the history and if those messages can be reduced, then it limits the power of progress that they can inspire. So talk with us about how you all are reaching, and I'll start with you, Lamerchi, since you haven't spoken out of order. Talk to us about how your art continues to tell those stories and push back on this current trend of removing support for art and culture overall, and especially our African American art and culture.
I see the current trend that we've been witnessing over the past week as another cycle of what has been an oppressive force that Dr. Gaither alluded to in terms of colonialism, imperialism, and those forces that continue to oppress. And as such, our history supports that we don't tolerate it very long. That there are mechanisms by which we have always had some access to being our own resource. In this community, particularly in Boston, there have been items in the 1800s called broadsides that would announce the news. Not in the innovative sense of what is immediate today, but they would be posted like a caution poster that would say, beware, there are people who will arrest you, in other words. It's worded more like what might assist an immigrant today, to know that your community is helping you to watch those who are in power against you. And so it is with this assertion of language that I think we can see that there is rhetorical value in DEI. If we approach it, solution-oriented approach would be to reframe our language. And so in the visual realm of dialogue and language there, positioning images so that they reframe our thought to progress, to go forward, and not let DEI be our pool that we dwell in, but that those issues remain and we describe them differently to move forward, to press. And I am saying that in terms of it being an opportunity for us to triumph despite the odds. We have always been those who have pushed a margin. We've always been the modernity in terms of our art, our culture. And so with those tools, as an artist and with other artists collectively, our identity is to push the realm of beauty, the realm of respect, the realm of integrity, the realm of understanding how policy even develops from that, and how we reread ourselves. So that's where I think that we can meet these challenges that have been so overt and so harmful with our own understanding and resource of what we have in our banks to combat it. These fight genealogies, as Dr. Carolyn Crockett calls it, fight genealogies and fight geographies can help us to move forward.
Yeah, when I always think about African American history, a lot of times the presentations that are brought to me and to our people are more of the struggle, but I also think of it as the Black joy. You know, I go back to the wonderful times over the centuries that our internal Black joy has empowered us to overcome. And I think that's part of the celebration of the Embrace statue. So talk to us a little bit about how important Black joy is in your presentation of the Embrace, and then we'll have the other folks as well share. But Amari, share with us about how important Black joy is to your organization.
Yeah, it is of utmost importance. You know, you can't lead people if you don't love people, right? And I don't. We've seen in history where the fuel of leading people has been hate, and the byproduct of that.
Always negative, always
in
negative.
this
yeah.
moment, joy has to be the fuel that powers the future. Love has to be the engine that powers the future. You know, there's a reason why there's laws against saying fire in a theater. We don't say fire in a theater because we know that the type of panic that occurs when people who are in close quarters with only limited exits hear that there's a fire in the theater. What we're seeing now with the diminishing of DEI and the attack of certain words, the policies like HR 9495, which can label nonprofits and art and artists as terrorists and terrorist organizations, this fear campaign, are like saying fire in a theater,
Yep,
right?
yep.
There's no actual fire in the theater, but just the idea that there might be is enough to move people into a level of anxiousness
Scared,
and,
yeah, to
and
use scare
anxiety
and fear.
that they're frozen, that they can't do work. And so it's important thinking about Dr. King's final book, Where Do We Go From Here, Community or Chaos. It's important that there are some of us, right, and art and artists are part of that coalition of people that are the steady hands, that can help translate what's going on, that can bring back things from the past and say, we've been here before, it looked different. I know you think it's not the same, but there's some similarities between what's happening now and what's happening.
Our struggle is a reoccurring of the same
That's right.
struggle
We are in the matrix.
that has been cyclical over time,
That's
as
right.
Dr. both of you alluded to. And
There
Dr.
is a
King so
prevailing falsity in all of this, which is if you translate it DEI to DNA, you instantly get a different result because almost everybody who's American would then flunk. So all of these people that to be discarded and thrown out are one and the same as the people who are here. And all of that immediately becomes folly. So I think sometimes we have to just pull the cover off of these efforts to obscure. In truth, there is nothing that claims to be American of which we are not a part. Not
Not one thing.
an attached chapter, but integral to what the thing is itself. The Native American contributions to notions of American democracy, African and Black contributions to religion and philosophy, all of these are pivotal to how the world exists and to American contribution to it. And none of those, if you dig enough, is without our input. Often stolen, frequently miscredited, but never absent.
Yes.
The most important thing you can say about your life is that you were engaged with it, that you had agendas, that there were things that you knew and wanted to do. I say that for the King Espelta tomb. I say it's not necessary to claim to have been first for everything under the sun. But it is necessary to say, I was there. I was the
A
actor.
contributor and,
I
and
was
a, and a
not
positive
the victim.
force.
Right.
I
Yes.
exercised volition. Because that is what makes us human.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank
the
you.
commitment to act
to act.
in some way and to make the world different after we've been here than it was before we came.
So eloquently said. And on that note, I just remind everybody, African American history, Black American history is American history.
Yes.
And we have been here from the beginning of this nation and have contributed on many levels and will continue to.
And even beyond that is world history.
Is world,
Yeah,
that's true.
there's a
Because-
global context.
Yeah.
Homo sapiens dispersed from the east of Africa, and all of the present human family, Homo sapiens,
Yes.
share that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
As I
look
said,
out and kiss
yeah,
your brothers and sisters instead of kicking
Kicking your
your
brothers
brothers
and
and sisters.
Well, thank you.
We are seen diasporically as a global people,
Yes.
and
And
so
that is-
that is our strength in that context.
yeah. We should definitely rethink African American history as the African diaspora history.
You know, the other thing that's important to realize
Yes.
is the cultural forms that have been enormously influential throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century globally in terms of popular culture especially, but, quote, high culture as well, have been invariably inflected by black presence. No matter where you go, all kinds of remote places where you don't necessarily see a lot of our faces, but you hear our sounds.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't want to just jump in really quickly. I think that we saw last night was the Grammys, and though one of the earliest winners of the Grammys was Charlie Pride, an African American
Yes.
man, many people don't think of today's country music as an origin of that it had a great influence from African American artists early on, but it has, and it still does, and obviously with Beyonce winning her first Best Album for her country album, that's just one example of how our culture has always permeated a particular genre, and finally, we're getting credit for it. So on that note, I do have to go. I'll leave you with the last word, Dr. Gaither.
Well, let's just say we have a wonderful tradition of improvisation that has kept the world dancing, listening, and reciting, and made it more humane.
Well, thank you for that. So I want to thank all of my wonderful guests, Dr. Barry Gaither, Lametti Frazier, and Amari Parrish Jeffries.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And this concludes our episode of WGBH's Amplify. I'm Ron Mitchell, co-owner, editor, and publisher of New England's Bay State Banner. And thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.